As you might be aware, with essentially the increased social media usage and increased internet usage across the world, worldviews are clashing in a global arena these days. Unlike perhaps even 6 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, these days, you can see on the internet, on YouTube and elsewhere, tremendous amount of material being shared in relation to challenging Christians, presenting Islam, presenting atheism, agnosticism, all sorts of different things happening online. But our God is still as good a God as he was to King David. Remember the time when Goliath came to the kingdom of Israel, and he stood at the borders and he cried out saying, "Hey, who is here to come and fight with me?" And when the nation, when the rest of the nation were sort of didn't know what to do, King David, who wasn't a king at that time, who was a young man, very young man at that time, we understand that King David actually became a king much later on in life. When he was around 30, he was already beginning to have authority. So this is pre-30. So maybe around 20s, maybe even a little bit less, give or take a couple of years. So I'm really thrilled to be amongst youngsters today. And especially if I could encourage all of you, our God is almighty. El Shaddai is mighty to command things into existence, is mighty to great and marvelous things. And regardless of what we accomplish or don't accomplish, he is mighty to wrap things up at the right time. The end is going to come, and he will do all things necessary. He is in control. However, it'll be lovely if many of us stand up to the opportunity that stands in front of us, like it stood in front of King David before he became a king, the young David. A great opportunity is ahead of us, a wonderful opportunity, especially youngsters. God doesn't like lukewarm people, you know it. He likes us either to be hot or much rather, be cold. Of course, we don't want to be cold. We want to be hot. And so I'm thoroughly thrilled because young blood can be, boiling. So I'd like to especially encourage all youngsters to take this challenge seriously. Now, of course, last time I spoke about a month ago, and the focus was Islam. We are actually going to continue along those lines. I think I have around 1 hour 40 minutes, including from the time I started actually. So perhaps a little bit less right now. And my intent is really to maybe allot around 40 minutes at the end for Q&A. And the initial 1 hour, I'd like to actually make my presentation. And even in that, I want to have a Q&A in between, and I'll tell you when. I'll have a Q&A in between. I think I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes initially, and then a Q&A in between. So with that, let's get started. You might remember, so let me share my screen here. You might remember the topic we started off with last time, which is that Islam is a hopeless myth. And some of you might even remember the picture that I showed you. Islam comes across as a mighty man, as a huge challenger like Goliath. But interestingly, through God's grace, when you challenge Islam, it runs away or flees away or dissolves like Goliath again, who didn't even, I suppose David spent maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes with Goliath, not any longer. It was Goliath, as big as he appeared, he was as useless in front of King David. And so Islam is very similar. Looked like Goliath, but is a hopeless myth. And I'm going to actually go through that a little bit more comprehensively this time, hopefully today I'll be able to give you a full overview and a greater confidence for all of you. And so especially if the questions could be especially on the content today, I'll consider that to be a bit of a success, because I think that people are grappling with the content given and are able to appropriately respond. Okay, so Islam, a hopeless myth. Now, to start off, I want to remind you the initial few slides I'm going to, you would have seen already, but I want to remind you, we are Christians. We are Christians, and of course we have the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament. For simplicity, let me just focus on the New Testament. And if you consider our history, Christian history, and by that I mean where we got our beliefs from, which is clearly, of course, from the first century. If we consider our history, I mentioned this, I think, the previous time also, between AD 0 and 30, AD 30, give or take a couple of years here and there, you have marvelous national miracles with our precious Lord Jesus at the center. National miracles. Everyone in the nation got to know. It was public, nothing secretive, where people can claim something and get away with, idiotic claims. But this is proper national miracles. Everyone could see between AD 0 and AD 30. And of course, the pinnacle of which is the death, burial, resurrection of the Lord Jesus Christ. I've written a book about this, and I think I've sent a PDF copy also, an ebook to Pastor Blesson. If you don't have access to that, if anyone hasn't received that, please ask Pastor Blesson. It's a massive historical event, well documented. And what we find is, for a national miracle-based life, you have good records made well within 40 years by Christians, and well within, from AD 30 to AD 100, well within 70 years by non-Christians also. You have Christians, you have non-Christian Romans, non-Christian Jews, non-Christian Greeks. Everyone who are qualified testifying. That's the remarkable level of quality of our New Testament history. In contrast, I'm going to demonstrate to you during the session 1 and 2 with the Q&A in between, how hopeless of a myth Islam is, despite the fact that your Muslim friends or Muslim apologists you might have come across, or popular names such as Zakir Naik, if you've heard some of these names, despite the fact that they put up a very, very bold face, it's a hopeless myth. And I'm really looking forward to the times when even people such as Zakir Naik would be on the same stage, so we can demolish, demoralize, and make them, essentially make them finish their careers. That's how hopeless a myth. And like our lovely friend Johan said, we don't do any of this for our own pleasure, but for the glory of our precious Lord. So that's the contrast. This is the Christian history. And now Islam, this is how it shows up. Like a bodybuilder, anytime they ask a question, the way they push, this is how they come across. But when you actually look behind the scenes, the picture perhaps may not be clear. This one isn't a bodybuilder. The body, below the chest is not of a bodybuilder. This is a joker. This is the true history of Islam. This is the real Islam. This is real Islam. Now, I want to, so of course, the entire couple of sessions today, the entire discussion is going to be on history, but I'm going to take one step back just so you know. Look, any supernatural revelation, the point I'm going to make right now is that it's not just history. Everything about Islam is terrible, not just history. Everything about Islam. Now, what do I mean by everything? Now, for any supernatural revelation, the revelation has to have some sort of legitimacy. Now, of course, Islam tries to claim the legitimacy in at least 4 different ways. It tries to tag along with the Bible. It tries to actually claim some details about pre-Islamic, but outside of the Bible history. It tries to actually portray a particular picture of how Islam began. And it also claims that the Quranic content is supernatural. Somehow, using one of those four or any combination of this, it says, look, I am supernatural. Explore any one of these, you will see that it is the same bodybuilder as it appears from a distance. The moment you inquire, there is nothing to the claim at all. Every claim actually can be demolished in a couple of minutes of sincere discussion. That's what we see. Of course, points 2 and 3 are related to history, and that is what we're going to expand on today. And that, because it's not historical, I'm going to claim that Islam is a hopeless myth. Now, finally, also outside of the legitimacy claims, even if you give a last line, you might have seen, in things like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire or Kaun Banega Crorepati, where there are options to phone a friend. You don't know the answer, at least, have a lifeline. Phone a friend, 50-50, and this sort of stuff, or ask the audience or some such thing. So even if we extend a last lifeline to Muslims in relation to Islam and say, okay, well, tell us about Islam, what we see is, in terms of morality, it's an absolute gibberish nonsense. Nothing to do with God by a million miles. In other words, everything about Islam is terrible, absolutely terrible. And therefore, Islam shouldn't even have had a chance on the face of the earth. But unfortunately, like Goliath existed, Islam also exists today, and we have a massive mandate through God's grace for us to demolish Islam from the face of the earth and save Muslims. So, of course, points 2 and 3 are related to history, and that is what I'm going to expand on over the next 10 minutes or so, where we expose the fact, where I'm going to essentially give you an introduction to how the history of Islam works. And then I'll actually open up the floor for a bit of a Q&A, just to make sure I am bringing all of you on the same page with me. Okay, so what is Islamic history? Islamic history actually revolves around two main cities. Everyone, please note, I'm going to have a quick Q&A session, and I'm going to find out if everyone is on the same page. So especially the youngsters. So please pay attention. The history revolves around two main supposed cities. And you know the names of the cities today: Mecca, Medina. Two main cities. And the claim is, mainly between these two cities, the religion started. And it started as something which is as a last testament. After our precious Lord's New Testament, they claim we have come as a last testament. They claim we have a supernatural history. Tremendous things happen and so on. But it revolves around two cities. The first one is Mecca. Now, of course, in this picture, I've shown Mecca because that's where things are supposed to have started. And this little thing at the center, you might be familiar with this, which is Kaaba. In Mecca, there is this Kaaba, which is a structure, a massive, cube-like structure, where, essentially, which is claimed to be built by Abraham. That's the claim. And so if you look at the timeline that I've given on the right-hand side, I have divided the right-hand side into three segments, as you can see. The last segment is when Islam is supposed to have started. The middle segment is when Muhammad is supposed to have started, who, of course, was born before he became a messenger. So that's the middle segment. Now, before Muhammad even was born, Islam claims that certain things happened in Mecca. In Mecca, and that is a crucial point. Focus carefully. It's around the city Mecca. What are the claims? Around 2000 BC, which is around the time Abraham, of course, walked on the face of the earth. The claim is Abraham, Ishmael, and Mecca. Abraham built, you might have heard about the fact of, Abraham having to sacrifice his son. We know in Bible, Isaac, Mount Moriah. But Muslim claim is it's Kaaba and it's Ishmael. So it's in Mecca. And because Abraham built this, they go on to suggest that essentially since the time of Abraham, from across the world, there is the Hajj. You might have heard the term Hajj today, where Muslims travel to Mecca. The claim that they have is, Adam was a Muslim, Abraham was a Muslim, everyone is a Muslim, and therefore, since the time of Abraham, especially as he built the Kaaba, people from across the world travel to Mecca to visit Kaaba and to pray at Kaaba like they do today. That's the claim. So pre-Islamic Hajj to Mecca. And in their mind, Ishmael is a chief messenger, is an important messenger along with Abraham and Isaac. Ishmael is an important messenger. Arabs today, today we come across the name Arabs. In their mind, Arabs are descendants of Ishmael. In other words, all Arabs are Ishmaelites. And clearly, which means that in Kaaba, in Mecca, in and around Kaaba, even before Muhammad arrived at the scene, there was already Islam. Because Adam was a Muslim, Abraham was a Muslim, Ishmael was a Muslim, and Jesus was a Muslim, and so on. Everything was Muslim, and therefore there was Islam in Mecca even before Muhammad arrived on the scene. And unfortunately, though, for them, since the time of Abraham, at some stage, idolatry crept in. At the time of Abraham, no idolatry. It's just the fact that there was an altar, which is this cube, Kaaba cube, where they apparently worshipped Islamic Allah, or supposedly. But at some stage, idolatry, meaning physical idols, came in, and they lost the plot. They were on a downward trend. This is what Muhammad came to solve or deal with. So Muhammad arrives on the scene AD 670, supposedly. He is from Ishmael because he is an Arab. Remember, for them, Arabs are Ishmaelites. All Arabs are Ishmaelites. And therefore, as long as someone is an Arab, they can claim that I am from Ishmael, and therefore they can claim I am from Abraham. So Muhammad was from Ishmael and therefore from Abraham. And Muhammad's main city, his home city, was Mecca. Of course, he has an outside of Mecca history also, but Mecca was his main city. So that's AD 670. He was born, and then many things happened. When he was around 40 years of age, he becomes a prophet. And the way he becomes a prophet is what you can see here, AD 710. He suddenly begins having supernatural revelations. But the starting of the supernatural revelation is when he meets an angel in person, in a cave. In a cave, he meets. It's like, it's very similar to how we would think Mary met an angel, or Daniel saw an angel. This sort of visitation. An angel comes and visits Muhammad. That's where he was told that he is now a prophet. Sorry, one second. He is now a prophet, and there began the life of a prophet. And his main task, remember, is to bring back Islam. He's not starting a new religion. He is bringing back what was there before idolatry kept in. This is their story. This is their story. They depend on this story to bring. So he is essentially bringing back Islam. Islam isn't starting at that time. He is bringing back Islam. So as he proclaims, look, the problem is there is an idol worship population, native population, and he is standing there and saying, all idols need to be demolished. We need to bring back a non-idol worship based system, worship system. And they got terribly upset, and they persecute him. So Meccan Arabs based in Mecca, persecute Muhammad. So all of these happened in Mecca, the first city. Now, as persecution arose, many minor events happened. There was even a minor, running away somewhere but coming back to Abyssinia and so on. I'll ignore the minor events. Now enters the second city. So that, of course, on the left you see Mecca. And on the right, you have Medina, which is, of course, an Arab city also, because it's in the Arabian Peninsula. It's a few. It's quite a distance from Mecca, going up northwest along the coastline. And so, major event. This is a major event in history for Muslims, supposedly. It happens in AD 722, and it is what is called Hijrah. Hijrah. And that is essentially the fleeing of the early Muslims from Mecca to Medina. They are fleeing for life because people are trying to kill them. They're fleeing for life. It's so major, in Christian calendar, in global calendar today, we have the usage of Anno Domini AD. Today, this year is 2025, AD 2025. Anno Domini, which is calibrated against the birth of the Lord Jesus Christ, although there is an error made because it was retrofitted, but it's based on the birth of the Lord, our precious Lord Jesus Christ. And therefore, we understand the birth of our Lord is significant. Guess what? Hijrah is so significant to Muslims that in Islamic calendar, everything is AH. You might have come across this. AH. Hijrah. Hijrah is their calibration point. Not even Muhammad receiving revelation and so on. Muhammad fleeing from Mecca to Medina is the crucial point in time for them. So that's Hijrah. Very important. And that's when the second city comes in. Now, certain events happen in the second city. The second city is a friendly city for the early Muslims. As a matter of fact, people of the natives, this is all supposed history. I'm not saying this is true. I'm just saying this is how they paint history, or they claim history to be. Essentially, the people of the natives, the inhabitants of Medina, invited Mecca and the early Muslims to come there because they saw Muhammad as a wonderful leader. So in other words, it's a marvelously friendly local population who Muhammad and his team, especially Muhammad, is supposed to govern or arbitrate between. He is the chief guy. He's sort of the moderator, an arbitrator. He's the chief guy. And apparently there were Jews, 3 Jewish tribes. According to Islamic history, there were 3 Jewish tribes in Medina, apparently. And now is when the Ummah is born. The term Ummah in Arabic is Islamic, let's say, community. If you see the way, if you go, wherever you are, if you go around, if you see some, donations, if people ask for donation and so on, you might come across the word Ummah. They're essentially asking them Islamic Ummah to come and donate, the Islamic community to come and donate. This is where the Islam community is supposed to have been born, AD 722, the year of the Hijrah. Within in the same year they're there. So it's and it's based on a constitution. Of course, I'm assuming most of us are from India. India has a constitution, Indian constitution. Similar to that, Islam, not Arabia. Islam has a constitution, which they want to impose even here. For them, Islamic constitution is the chief thing, which they want to impose anywhere, everywhere, which is called the Medinan constitution. So they have a Medinan constitution as to how to govern a nation and that sort of stuff. So AD 722. Now, many things happen. There are battles fought and all those sorts of stuff. But finally, the Islamic community gained so much power and dominance that they could now return to Mecca. Clearly the arrow mark, this is not supposed to be an arrow mark, but anyway, it looks like an arrow mark, so apologies for the miscommunication here. Medina to Mecca, so from the right to the left. So they're returning to Mecca. Now, because they are so dominant and they fought a few battles and all those sorts of stuff, they completely take over Mecca in their mind, in even almost like a bloodshedless takeover. So that's Islamic. And finally, of course, now you're back in Mecca. Now Medina is Muslim, Mecca is Muslim, 2 prominent cities in the entire peninsula. Now in their mind, and Muhammad dies soon after. 632 AD, they arrive and take over Mecca. I've gone back one slide. Now they are 732 AD. And so 10 years initially 12 years in Mecca, then 10 years in Medina. Now they are back. Soon after that, Muhammad apparently passes away. And then was born the caliphate. The word caliph means successor. Muhammad's successors are born. The initial caliphate is called, today it's called Rashidun Caliphate, which supposedly existed, which was made up of the four compatriots of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, Uthman, Ali, and what's the four? Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. Four compatriots of Muhammad rule one after another, I think in that order, and that caliphate is called Rashidun Caliphate. Muhammad dies within he doesn't leave the peninsula at all, which is, by the way, called Hijazi. The area that they lived in is called Hijazi. Now the Rashidun Caliphate is for the first time going out of Hijazi. They're going into Africa, they're going to Damascus and all the sorts of stuff, into Syria, going up north. And so Rashidun Caliphate, 732 AD, now is when the identity is already established in their minds. Muslim, Islam, Muslim as the identity of a person who follows religion. Islam as the identity of the religion being followed. And Muhammad as the person who is the prophet of the religion. Or at least the rebirthed religion. And the documents written at that time, Quran. Especially the third caliph, Uthman, standardized it, and you have manuscripts in their mind of Uthman. So that's roughly the history. Remember, Mecca, Medina, return to Mecca, and that's pretty much, and Muhammad passes away, and then from there Islamic caliphate expands, and of course, as you might be aware, it came all the way to India, and of course it went all the way to Indonesia and so on. Today it went all the way, it went everywhere in the globe. In India we hear of slave rulers, you might have heard, all sorts of different, Akbar, all sorts of names you might have heard. It all started off here, and this is the history according to them. Now let me open up the floor for Q&A. Is everyone now is there any question now in relation to what we've discussed so far? The storyline is very important, because we're going to find out that the storyline is a hopeless myth, and so the storyline is very important. Any questions that people might want to ask, please? Feel free. No question is silly question. I just want to make sure everyone is on as best as possible. Everyone is on the same page. Youngsters, especially, if you have questions. Who's the brave first one?
Arul brother, we had some questions from last time. Was there somebody who's raised hands? Prince Paul.
Sure. Prince, yeah. Prince, please unmute yourself and ask. Or should we unmute him?
Praise the Lord, Pastor. This is Prince from Keithley. My question is it historically proven that Muhammad is from Ishmaelian lineage?
That's a good question. You're going to find out that, I gave plenty of details. Almost everything, if not everything, is just junk. None of this is true, evidentially. None of this, including the claim that he is from Ishmael.
All right, I am looking forward to hear that.
Sure.
Thank you, Pastor.
Welcome. Any other question?
Hello.
Hello, Christian.
Hey. So I'm trying to work out what was the main actual message that he's trying to deliver to the people of Mecca. He's trying to say that we should avoid idols and then worship. Like, what was the initial message he was trying to give?
Yeah, his message is very simple. You can't have idols. You simply can't have idols. Very good question. So what was his message? Ultimately, no idols. But what it actually practically meant for people in Mecca, in their mind, in this false storyline, was that they had Islamic Allah also. I use the term Islamic Allah. They call him just Allah. Allah also there, but they had many other idols added to
Oh,
him.
okay.
And so in their mind, all the other idols have to be removed. You need to only focus on the one main guy who is the Islamic Allah.
So he's telling everyone to avoid the other idols and just focus on Allah. And then
Yeah. They have
does
to
Allah have an
demolish it.
idol, or is he just the one God without an idol, and everyone else has
The-
idols?
The one God clearly in history has been depicted as an idol. Clearly in history, Allah is an idol, but in their mind, it wasn't an idol based one God.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Arulji, just one question. As you said, Muhammad, they are from, as Islam claims, it's from coming from Ismail. Maybe I don't know whether I missed something somewhere. Is that specifically mentioned in Quran that all these history that they are from, starting from Ismail, all these things, or is there some other source which reveals all these things?
But that's a very good question. Is this of course, the brother is pointing out to one of the claims that I'm making, which is that Muhammad is from Ishmael, and brother is asking if that claim is actually in the Quran. It's a marvelous question, as a matter of fact, and it'll highlight some details I'm going to move on to after this, which is that the Quran claims that whoever wrote the Quran, whoever contributed to the Quran, comes from Ishmael. At least portions comes from Ishmael. The Quran claims that. But the Quran doesn't claim Muhammad is from Ishmael. Because the Quran doesn't connect those things. When a Muslim reads, though, they're going to say that, of course, all of the Quran is contributed by Muhammad, and therefore Muhammad is from Ishmael, according to the Quran. But mainly, most of the points here actually are claims. The entire storyline comes from outside of the Quran. But in this particular case, Quran connects the writer or the contributor to Ishmael, if that makes sense.
Okay, all right.
Cool, thank you.
All right.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, brother, I have a question here.
Yes, please.
So is it just whatever you spoke about the history about the Islam and the Muhammad and the Muslims, they claim themselves that they are the lineage of Abraham, but the Bible records very clearly from the genealogy of Jesus. And if you look into the book of Matthew, right, and we do have an evidence. In Quran anywhere does it they have claiming, or you say that they're claiming, but is it any mention in the Quran that there is a lineage from Adamic to until at least until the Muhammad?
Not in the Quran. There's no lineage in the Quran. As a matter of fact, like I said earlier, the Quran doesn't even claim that Muhammad actually wrote the entire Quran. The Quran doesn't even claim. It doesn't even come across like that. But Quran refers to a title called Muhammad. Quran refers to Ishmael also. And it claims in some places that some of the contributors, whoever they are, one or more, are from Ishmael. But it doesn't, nowhere does it even attempt to provide a lineage. But like I said, there are later writings, which I'll actually talk about that in a moment. Later writings provide an elaborate myth, very late writings. Now, when Muslims read even late writings, they unfortunately, the way Islam works, the brainwashing system works, they do not have an awareness of timeline at all. So when they read even a later source, they think it's an early source. They don't even realize what is late, what is early. So, which is how any myth is born. As time progresses, they make things up and make it appear as if it's historical record. and that has happened. So during later times, there is an elaborate scheme plotted where they give an entire lineage, not in the early times.
Okay, but
Not in
there
the
is no
Quran.
evidence as you mentioned in Quran. That's what, right? There's no
Nothing in the Quran. Nothing in the Quran.
nothing in Quran. Okay.
No.
But
It is
what is their evidence of claiming the lineage?
later sources.
Later sources. Okay, but the later sources are not in line with Quran.
Later sources can be made to appear made to appear in line with the Quran, because even though the Quran doesn't connect Muhammad with Ishmael, neither does it attempt to provide a lineage from Abraham to Muhammad. It doesn't attempt to do both, but it has plenty of gaps all over the place, and you can fill in the gaps using the late literature.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I'm saying? It's almost as if, for instance, let's say we did not have a lineage for Jesus traced through David, for example. If we did not, which we clearly have, and if we did not, we'll much rather give up on following Jesus, because that's sensible behavior. But for a moment, if you assume, because you'll all be familiar with Jesus, I'm using Jesus as an example. If there was no lineage at all specified in the Bible, and if maybe 2 centuries, 3 centuries later, if someone said, hey, I have a lineage, and presents a lineage, and if some in that situation people may go, oh, okay, maybe I can use that. You know what I mean? So it's a later addition to the material.
Okay, thank you, brother.
Welcome. One last question, and then
Hi, I got a question. This is about so we heard that the descendants of like the Jewish, like in the modern day Jews, they're descended from Isaac, and we hear that the modern day Arabs are descended from Ishmael. I know that there isn't any proof that actually Muhammad is a descendant of Ishmael, but do you think there are actual descendants of Ishmael, like even living today, like are the Arabs actually descendants from them, or is that not like true either?
no, that's a good question. So Muhammad, apart from talking about Muhammad, the question is, are Arabs descendants of Ishmael? Very simply, according to historical records, today's Arabs would have Ishmael blood also, but they'd have many more other people's bloods, if that makes sense. Essentially, during the 6th century or 7th century AD, when Muhammad is supposed to have born, and if we trace back even going to the biblical times, there were many people groups in that area, many people groups in that area, only one of which is a small tribe of Ishmaelites. And
Okay.
of course, they became slightly bigger, 12 tribes with 12 sons, I think, if I remember correctly, according to even the Bible. But even then, there were many other tribes in that entire peninsula, let alone in nations such as Syria, Egypt, and so on, where again people think they are Arabs. And so, in other words, today's Arabs are clearly a mixed multitude. And as a matter of fact, in the biblical reference and even in the early archaeological reference, the term Arabs refers to a mixed multitude, not a pure Ishmaelite bloodline. So Ishmael's blood would be there in maybe 5% of the population. God knows who they are, and God knows what other blood they have. And it's hard to say who those 5% are, and it's hard to say who the 95 remaining percent are. Not just now, even in the 7th century.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Lovely. Okay, so just a recap. The point is, we're talking about 2 cities, Mecca, Medina, and the entire storyline. So far, remember the crucial point is the title here, supposed history. It's supposed history. I'm not saying this is real, but this is the claim. Where do they get the claim from? I think one of the brothers in a question he asked, I had to highlight that. This is all from late literature. The storyline comes from late literature. I'll actually show that to you in a minute. So in other words, I'm not suggesting that these are claims from the 7th century as Islam began, as we see, or as Islam rebirthed, as how Muslims see. The storyline doesn't come from there. The storyline comes from much later times. Okay, so Mecca, Hijrah, Mecca to Medina, running Hijrah, and in Medina, Islamic community starting Ummah, and then coming back to Mecca this way, sorry, right to left, taking over Mecca. Now all of Hijazi are Muslims. The entire area is Islamic. Identities are born, Quran is codified, and from there on they go elsewhere. That's the storyline so far. Now let me, where does the story come from? Like I said, 570 to 630 or 632 AD actually, is around the time when Islam is supposed to have rebirthed, according to them. And according to them, I'm not talking about according to evidence, but according to them, the storyline, most parts of the storyline, if not all parts, actually come from AD 830 forward. So there's a massive 200-year gap. According to them, note carefully, according to them, that these were written, some resources were written at this time. And what are these records? You know, I say records and then question mark, because, you know, who knows? These, I mean, should we call made up story records? You know, that's why the question mark there. If you hear from a Muslim, you will hear of multiple literature, only one of which would be Quran. Apart from Quran, they have records of, in their minds, sayings of Muhammad, which are hadiths. Hadiths are literally sayings. So it's really a list of quotes, mainly with Muhammad as the character, but also with other characters involved. Sayings, hadiths. Hadith, if you hear the story, term hadith. Hadith is a term for the genre, not particular books. There are multiple books, and there's massive disagreement as to which one are good, which one are right, which one are wrong. This is where Shia Sunni split happens. Sunnis reject Shia hadith, Shias reject Sunni hadiths, and they have a very different history for everything and so on. And even amongst Sunnis, they have all sorts of weird, different ideas, and they even kill each other over this, and that sort of difference is there. And apart from the hadiths, there is something called Sira, which is biography. And again, they claim this is the genre where, like similar to our Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, for our precious Lord, they have biographies. Now, again, this is their claim. I'm not saying this is true. You know, if we were to, essentially biography, Sira, and then tafsirs or later expositions, you know, like how Christians may write books. Even today, we may write books on Philippians or whatever, you know, Christian leaders. And these are expositions. Likewise, they have early tafsirs in their minds. By early, I mean something, you know, a few hundred years after 830 AD here, which also are in their mind, shed some light on Islam's history. So these are all from 830 onward, according to them. According to evidence, you know, this is hopeless. But for now, according to them. Thankfully, though, which is what I'm going to mainly use today, there is much early artifacts that we could use to evaluate if the claims are true. Much of the history of much of the storyline comes from here, comes from these documents. Note carefully, much of the storyline comes from these documents. But thankfully, we have artifacts from early times we can use to check if the claims here about this time is true, because these artifacts are from this time, early times. So we can use these to say, hey, is there consistency and that sort of stuff. And my conclusion is going to be no. Thankfully, all of these contradict key. They all negate the claims here. Remember earlier I said, you know, the building blocks I showed and what happened, significant events. Almost all are contradicted by early sources. Guess what? The Quran itself contradicts most of the claims explicitly, which most Muslims wouldn't have a clue about because they don't read properly. And so that is the key I'm going to open. That's the lock. That's the thing I'm going to open up for us all right now. Okay, so in other words, our conclusion is going to be Islam is a hopeless myth. Why? What is a myth? Well, something happened in history. And then during later times, people made things appear as if it's some supernatural history. But in reality, what really happened there was almost nothing, almost nothing, that no one really cared at that time. But later, guys, for whatever reason, maybe for power, maybe, all sorts of different reasons, for money and whatever, they made a big deal. Of course, in this case, a supernatural history around what really happened around this time. So that's what we're going to unpack. All right. So just to comment on what I've said here, the myth, the storyline comes from, according to them, late resources, but actually according to evidence, even later. When you go to manuscripts for, let's say, the hadiths and seerah and so on, they're very, very late. Some of them as late as, the last couple of centuries. That's just the manuscripts, let alone peer review. In other words, even what was written centuries later, there is no indication that anyone verified at the time of the writing. In other words, God knows, some Tom, Dick and Harry could have sat inside his loo during his loo break, might have written some random stuff, which no one got to verify anyway, and therefore they were opened up only even centuries later, maybe 500 years later, maybe 300 years later, maybe 100 years later. Sorry, maybe 100 years earlier to us. And when things were put together, as printing press came in, they said, oh, let's also do something with the printing press. So no review happened, even at the time of the late writings, as shown by the manuscripts. Now, normally Muslims would say the reason why we wrote everything late is because we are an oral tradition. We are an oral, orally communicating community. This is absolutely wrong. Like I said, even the Quran contradicts. So the claim that they orally transmitted everything is just wrong. There is zilch evidence positive. There is every evidence negative for the claim that things are orally communicated. For example, I'll give you a simple example. Quran is referred to as a book, especially between two bindings, multiple times, even in the Quran. Meaning, they saw the Quran also as a written document at all times. No one saw any oral tradition. Number one, evidence number one. Evidence number two, even in the Quran, there is reference to how they were writing down wills. When someone passes away, you write a will. They wrote down even wills, silly little wills. So if they were to write down silly little wills, how much more would they write down supernatural history? So the claim that they are an oral tradition is just wrong. On top of that, there are recent academic researchers who have worked on this. Especially one of them is Dr. Joshua Little, and you can. This is a link. I know all of you are going to get the PDF, and in the PDF, this is a link. Please click. It'll open up a YouTube page, and you'll find out his 21 reasons. 21 reasons of Dr. Little as to why hadiths are made up and are fraught with issues. 21 academic reasons. This is an Oxford, I think Oxford, I don't think he's Cambridge, I think he's Oxford scholar. He finished his PhD fairly recently. 21 reasons. But one of the things you need to bear in mind is also, by the way, because I'm showing a recent scholar, just so you bear in mind, the reason I'm showing, and I'll be showing many other scholars, and we'll be referencing many other material in the coming half an hour or so. Note carefully, the reason I am referencing to late resources, i.e. something which is recent, is not because, we are very late. It's just because no one before them studied anything. They were blindly following. No one cared to study. Unlike our biblical history, which has been challenged from a very early time. The Christian history was challenged from a very, very early time. That plenty of copious amount of material was written right from the start. But with Islam, everyone were blind believers, especially at the threat of a sword, and therefore they blindly said, "Okay, we are Muslims," and so no one studied. Proper research is happening only very recently, as recent as the last couple of decades, as a matter of fact. And so, okay, 21 reasons. So he'll unpack why hadiths unreliable. Unfortunately, though, because in my mind, he doesn't say this, in my mind, because he earns the daily bread through his work, he doesn't want to say Islam's history is thoroughly useless. He doesn't want to say that because he needs to get money to make his living, in my mind. And therefore, he stops short of saying this entire history is bogus. He rather says, oh, we can still work on it, we can do still research. That's where he stops. And that's where my last point comes. Dr. Little's conclusions don't go far enough. And I'm going to demonstrate why I'm saying this. I'm going to demonstrate that actually it's not just fraught with issues, 21 issues, but it's also that early evidence clearly contradict everything which are structurally important, which means this hadith literature is nearly useless. We should all pack it up and bin. There's not much use to it. It's not just that we say, you don't have much, you're not of top quality. We're rather saying you're useless. Dr. Little doesn't do, we are going to do. Okay, so now I'm going to now note carefully. I'm going to talk about various topics right now. In the next 10 minutes, in the time I have, I think. When am I supposed to stop, Brother Blessing? Can you please remind me?
Quarter past.
Quarter past. I'm supposed to stop, but we have a Q&A for at least half an hour before that. So I need to stop in maybe 15 minutes or so. Okay, so what are the early evidence that I'm going to use? I showed, remember I said I'm going to use early evidence to contradict the later stories. What are the early evidence? I have given a list here. I've expanded on the list here also. There are thousands of inscriptions. Believe it or not, no one cared to study. Before the last couple of decades, no one cared to study because they were blind believers. But just in the last couple of decades, literally, I'm talking about 30,000 already catalogued. And according to scholars, there are perhaps even 70 more thousand. We're talking about, can you imagine 100,000 or maybe even if it is 70,000? 70,000 rock inscriptions across the land area. Can you imagine? It's a huge source of information. And there are leading scholars. I've given some of the references here. I don't want to dwell much on this right now. You can use, check it up, later. But my main point is inscriptions, and they are beginning to even catalog and make it available online. There are two important resources. Ohio State University is the latest resource. This is going to be, through God's grace, if Christians use this tremendously, we will be able to demolish Islam entirely. On top of inscription, and which hasn't been done so far. Only a couple of scholars have picked up on this. Even leading figures who you might have come across from Speaker's Corner haven't yet taken this at all. They're merely focused on some minor points such as few coins that we have. But thousands and thousands of inscriptions, public world doesn't know yet properly. We have a massive task. I am taking it up. Through God's grace, if youngsters come on stage and do it along with me and others, it'll be marvelous. So coins, there are coins. There are early coins from that land area, which are popularly called Islamic coins, but there are many problems with the coins. So I'm just going to call them coins for now. By coins, I mean, currency. Of course, we have today's currency, which are minted through machines. You have coins from that time, which are sort of hand minted, through manual processes. You have coins. You have even the Quran, of course. Quran, we have manuscripts of the Quran. We have, of course, the Quranic content, what the Quran says inside the Quran. Like I said, there are multiple scholars. I've named only a few here. In the last slide, by the way, I've given a long list of all these scholars. You can search on internet and, you can study. We're talking about, if anyone goes through this, there's material for maybe 100, 200, 300, 500,000 PhD. Thesis based on some of the things that are yet to be explored. Just in the next couple of years, you can begin doing 1,000 different PhDs. That's how much scope it has. And there are early mosques, by mosques, I mean buildings or archaeological remains of buildings we have today. Okay, so that's the kind of early evidence we have. Now, I'm going to as best as I can over the next 10 minutes now, I'm going to go one step at a time and just demonstrate to you, how early evidence negate the storyline. For example, Mecca. The storyline, like I said, revolves around two important cities, Mecca, Medina. And Mecca is the holiest of them, holiest of those two, where you have Kaaba. Would you believe there is no shred of positive evidence for the claim that Mecca even existed pre-Islam? No shred of evidence, positive. Nothing exists. If it had stopped there, Islam would still have a lifeline. Guess what? Above the fact that there is no positive evidence, there is also the fact that there is tremendous level of negative evidence that Mecca could not have even existed. Could not have existed. And I have, 25 arguments. I have just, highlighted two arguments here. A couple of them. Nabonidus is, by the way, an emperor related to the biblical book of Daniel, as a matter of fact. In the book of Daniel, you might have come across this gentleman called Belshazzar. Nabonidus is the father of Belshazzar. And you may, some funny detail here, actually, which sheds some light on biblical story also. But I won't get into that for lack of time. But Nabonidus' argument, I have a link there. You can go there, which is one of the latest slides. Essentially, very simply, long story short, I have a screen grab from a YouTube lecture that the leading researcher, Michael McDonald, you can see that there. He's not a doctor still, by the way, because it was so fledgling a field when he started his research that he's not even a doctor, because at that time no doctorate existed for such study. It wasn't a field. But he has done tremendous research and he has opened up tremendous areas of research, and therefore he's not a doctor, but today his students are doctors, his very students, by the way. And so anyway, one of the and he is the leading scholar who is cataloging all the inscriptions, and one of the inscriptions is this, which is a Taimanitic inscription. You can see the text there. It's a screen grab from his lecture. You have a link of his lecture here as courtesy there. And very simply, an emperor goes to conquer the land from the north, from Assyria. Nabonidus is a Babylonian empire. It's from Babylon. From Babylon he goes. Babylon is today's Iraq. He comes south. Now he wants to, for some reason, curiously, he comes to Arabia. Archaeology elsewhere explains to us he's a moon worshipper, and moon worship hotspot was Arabia at that time. So he comes there and he wants to take over. Guess what? He takes over a city which is very north. Look, he's interested in the entire area, but he takes over a city very north, which is called Taman, which is an oasis city, Taman. And the inscription is found there, Tamar. And it essentially goes on to say, as you can see here, Nabonidus, king of Babylon, I came with the chief officer, and then he stays here in this area. And he says how long, one or two inscriptions together, he says how long he stayed here, and that's it. And then he returns. Now, if you want to take over the UK, you wouldn't come and stay in Southampton and go back. You really won't. Neither, at least Southampton is a relatively big city. You wouldn't come and stay, let's say, some little city in a shore somewhere and say, okay, I'm fine, I'm going back. No, if you want to take over the UK of today, you would want to come to London. London is the capital, London is the seat of the government and everything else and so on. So if you really have to technically take over, you have to come to London. Nabonidus goes there, he doesn't go to Mecca. One example, just one example. There are 25 arguments. And another example is a very, I mentioned about Michael McDonald, one of his students who is the foremost student. He's a Muslim. He's a Muslim. And I even think for the things that he's saying, he might even be killed for what he's saying. He is still a Muslim. And I don't even know if he's a closet atheist, because of this. But anyway, I have given a link for a video here. Check it out. Like I said, thousands of inscription across the Hijazi area. Guess what? In Mecca and in a nearby city called Taif, Together, they're seen always together, couple as a pair. Mecca and Taif, very close to each other. Together, there is almost nothing. Meaning, everyone is writing everywhere, but no one is writing here. Meaning, no one lived here. He actually catalogs maximum there are 40 inscriptions there, and they are almost negligible when it comes to material. No useful. Well, of course, everything is useful, but nothing shows up as indicating that it was a settlement area, and so on. Now you actually need to open this link. This is a marvelous link, and I have this in a couple of different slides. In the next slide also, check it out, because this is a leading scholar who is who is a self-confessed Muslim. A Muslim channel, YouTube channel, is asking the question, and the question they're asking him is, what's the evidence for Kaaba from pre-Muhammadan time? Very simple question. A Muslim scholar is being asked. See how much he struggles. See how much he struggles, because nothing exists. And find out, I'll go to Kaaba in a minute. But you see my point? And even in the Quran, by the way, you may not be familiar with this. In the entire Quran, there is only one place where the word Mecca appears. Only once. Can you imagine in the Bible, the entire Bible, the word Jerusalem appearing only once? Can you imagine? The entire word, the entire Quran has Mecca only once. And even there, it says it's a valley of Mecca. Apparently, referring to that as a valley, not as a city. It's so focused on the fact that it's a valley, not a city. So you can see that the existence of Mecca is in serious trouble, not just because there is no positive evidence, but there is because plenty of negative evidence. I'm going to now move on to quickly move on to the Kaaba. I told you, Mecca was supposed to have been a center of worship, with Kaaba already pre-Muhammadan times, very popular idolatry. From beginning from Abraham's time, people are supposed to have gone on Hajj. It's supposed to have been a popular religious tourist destination. Can you imagine Mecca today? Can you see in your minds? Mecca is a very rich city today because it's a tourist destination. They're building all sorts of massive billions of pounds of worth buildings because it's a tourist destination, religious tourist destination. But the claim is that was the case pre-Islam, pre-Muhammad. What's the evidence? No positive evidence. Like I said, for even the existence of city. Now I'm focused on the Hajj. Now, of course, for Hajj to be true, you need to have the city in place, which I said is not the case. I've given two. I'm repeating the two. On top of that, remember I said the last 2 points are purely in this slide, which corresponds to Hajj alone, which remember I said Muhammad al-Jalad, Dr. Jalad al-Jalad has 40 inscriptions that he has found in Mecca and Taif. And guess what? He finds an interesting pattern. It's not extensive at all. They're very minor, negligible inscriptions, but all of them pre-Islam are secular in nature. No one cared about religion in that area. Even the 40 inscriptions, among the 70,000 to 100,000 inscriptions, even the puny little 40 pre-Islam, what can be dated to pre-Islam, are all secular. And what can be dated to post-Islam are all monotheistic. In other words, no indication whatsoever that people existed there. But even if the people were there, no indication of it being a tourism spot, no Hajj, and especially no evidence for polytheism at all in this place where no one lived, no one went to. Add to that, I'm adding a new argument. This is my argument, the languages argument. With all the inscriptions we have collected, by the way, today, scholars are very confident about all the languages spoken, or many languages spoken in the entire area pre-Islam. You see the family there, the family tree of languages, and on the right here, the colored, the non-black entities are mainly from the Arabian Peninsula. And you can see there is South Arabian writings, North Arabian writings. And, together, South and North, together is Hijazi. South is Oman, Yemen, and North is Saudi Arabia and Qatar and UAE and so on. Now, look at this carefully. North Arabian, there are many languages. Can you see the categories? Nomads and people who were settled, towns. Taima, Dadan, I earlier showed, uh, I think Dadanik, or I can't remember from which city the Nabonidus inscription was, but these are the cities from the inscription comes, and their inscriptions come, and therefore the names of the languages, Taima, Dadan, Duma. And then the nomadic languages are named not after cities because they were in cities. Tamudic, Hismaic, Saphaitic. This is a categorization of languages. Would you believe none of this is related to Arabic? None. None related to Arabic, meaning no one spoke Arabic. Pre-Islam, no one spoke Arabic. All thousands of inscriptions pre-Islam are in languages not Arabic, meaning Arabic didn't even exist in that area. Which is quite understandable. Like I said, the Bible testifies of the fact of a mixed people group, all sorts of different languages. What language would have Ishmael spoken? Well, mother was from Egypt, father was from Hebrew. Father was a Hebrew. And so the language he would have spoken, I mean, likely is a mixture of Hebrew and Egyptian, Coptic. And so to claim that he is an Arab would be silly. So that's an idea for you. No, and there are many other people groups who are categorized there, and the Bible refers to them eventually as a mixed people group trying to even attack Israel, by the way. And an army of 1 million people actually attack Israel. It's in one of the later books of the Bible. Anyway, the point is very simply not Arabic. So Arabic didn't even exist. You know why? You know what my argument, which no one has pointed to so far. Guess what? Which means, can you imagine worldwide tourism from across the world, and you have a small people group who are supposed to have been from a same tribe, Arabic, yet the languages were preserved in a pristine manner, meaning there was no social interaction much. So no one was traveling apart from maybe moving around a little bit. For example, I'll give you a simple example. Most of you might come from Kerala, at least your ancestry. Kerala, Tamil Nadu. Actually, maybe I won't take Kerala because it's a complex history. Kerala traces back to Tamil, the language. But if I take the example of, let's say, Maharashtra, which speaks Marathi as their native tongue, and let's say the neighboring Andhra Pradesh, sorry, Karnataka speaks Kannada. The languages are still preserved as Kannada and Marathi because there is not much people moving around. Even after becoming part of the same country, there is not much people moving around. So the point is, where you see languages being distinctly preserved in a pristine manner, you can suggest that not much social interaction is happening, which means there was no Hajj happening. Hajj is supposed to unify everyone and supposed to have already created a common language. Of course, Arabic as a possible candidate, but it did not exist. And so that's my argument. Such arguments are, you can do PhD research on these. Can you see? Pre-Islamic claims are wrong. Now, please check up. This is again from Muhammad al-Jalad. Was there, the claim was Muhammad came to deal with idolatry, and there's no positive evidence. No positive evidence. You can go through the entire Quran. There is no reference to idols being worshipped during the writing of the Quran. Nothing. No positive evidence apart from the late myth. Contrary to that, there is much negative evidence. And you can, this is a YouTube video, an excerpt from a longer lecture, longer discussion interview that Dr. Jalad had. Check it out. Recent research suggests that across the Arabian Peninsula for 2 centuries at the least, and in some places for 5 centuries, there was no idol worship across the Arabian Peninsula before Muhammad is supposed to have arrived. Quite funny. Islam has a serious problem because the main mission Muhammad had was Don't have all these idols. Remember, one of the brothers, I can't remember if it is Christian or not, one of the brothers asked, how did what was his main message? That was his main message. Remove all idols. Only keep the main idol, the main guy. Allah. Guess what? This didn't even exist. So Muhammad couldn't have had a message to share in the 7th century. According to proper evidence, based on solid research. I've cited a YouTube video here. In the YouTube video, Dr. Jalal actually would point out to a point out to a research from a scholar, an archaeologist by name Leila Naimi. And she has catalogued the period. There was idolatry in the Arabian Peninsula, but it was wiped out by at least 2 centuries, and in some areas of the Arabian Peninsula, 5 centuries before Muhammad is supposed to arrive. Who did that is a serious question. And this is where the suggestion is it's Christian missionaries who actually spread the message of Christ quite early on, which is consistent with the fact that we have Arabic translated Bibles very early on in history. From the first few centuries, you have translations of the Bible in Arabic, New Testament in Arabic. And so it's an area of research, and every little point here will undermine Islam big time, because everything is fundamental for Islam's building blocks. Now, I moved on. I'm going to skip this. You can check this in detail later. But was Muhammad an Arab? Was Muhammad an Ishmaelite? We spoke about that a couple of times in the Q&A. Essentially, no evidence exists positive. Every evidence is negative. Arab is a very late identity. There is no reference to the fact that anyone kept track of who Ishmaelites were as they were mixing with the rest of the people group of that area. No one kept track. There's no resource. There's no indication anyone even bothered to keep track. And therefore this entire point is moot, and it's a blind belief statement, nothing more. Now, I want supernatural revelation of the Quran. The Quran is claimed to be a supernatural revelation. Muhammad in the cave, and an angel showing up. But I'll ask a poignant question right now. If any of you, please just ask for yourself, it's a thought experiment. If any of you ask yourself, if you meet an angel in your life, for how long would you remember that you met an angel? Okay, is there a quick volunteer? Anyone willing to answer? If you ever meet an angel in your, by meet I mean see an angel face to face. Please go on. Whoever wants to go first, unmute and please go on. For how long would you remember that you met an angel? Please unmute.
And their lifetime.
Lifelong.
Absolutely, entire life. I mean, who in the, of course, as long as you have sanity, you would remember that you met an angel. I'm not talking about dream. I'm not talking about vision. Those things are different. I'm not talking about, some things that you are seeing, but others are not seeing and so on. I'm talking about where you are actually meeting an angel face to face. If someone else had been there, they would have seen that sort of meeting. You'd remember your entire life. But Quran has plenty of content to suggest that whoever contributed to the Quran clearly was not confident that he met anyone like that. I'll give you a simple example. In Quran, Surah 10, Ayah 60, 61, there are online Qurans, by the way. You can access to check some of this content. I can even maybe give you a couple of links for you to peruse. Maybe I'll add that to the PDF. Anyway, one of the verses, this is not the text of the verse, this is my comment on the verse. One of them actually says, Islamic Allah is speaking to the one who is writing, one who is contributing to the Quran, and he's saying, oh, you don't invent a lecture, you're not inventing anything, we are witness of this. And then he goes on in the same chapter 10, 94, he says, if you are in doubt about what we are revealing, question those who read. He's not saying if you are in doubt, remember the fact that you met an angel. Elsewhere, Allah says that this guy whoever is contributing is not a madman, is not a reprobate. In other words, and then I'll give you one more example. In Surah 6, Ayah 103 to 106, the writer, the contributor himself is testifying, and he says, I am merely writing through inspiration, nothing more. Where people are questioning, help us understand how the message you have is a revelation from God. If any one of you were asked the question, help us understand how you are a messenger of God, and if you had met an angel, what would you do? Apart from other details, you'd also say, by the way, I also met an angel, wouldn't you? You know what I'm asking? If you want to, they're not asking for proof. They're merely asking for your testimony. How do you know you're a messenger? You'd say, look, an angel met me. Since then, I've been receiving all these revelations and I'm telling you. This guy, nowhere does he talk about him meeting an angel. Nowhere. Everywhere he gives an indication that he was merely going with, what we would think, oh, I thought about this. I'm telling you this sort of stuff, which is what he's calling as inspiration. I'm inspired to say, sometimes Christians also, may say, oh, I think God is saying something. Sometimes they get it wrong, but you know what experience I'm talking about. That is all that this guy has to point to, nothing more, which is a negative evidence against the claim that he received any supernatural revelation. Now, I need to quickly, in 2 or 3 minutes, just skip through, just go through many things here. Hijrah, remember I said Hijrah is a crucial incident? Remember? So much so that Hijrah is the calibration point for the timeline for Islam. Today, anywhere in the Muslim world, if you go, they'll use the calendar AH. AH in reference to Hijrah, year of Hijrah. Guess what? There is no early positive evidence for the usage of the AH. I don't mean AH in English clearly. I mean the equivalent of AH, Islamic caliphates did not use. And guess what? We have very early evidence from inscriptions dating within decades from the Hijazi area, the heartland of what is meant to have been Islamic, where they use a different calendar. They use this expression year of the believers, and I've cited a research article, a research a thesis someone has produced from 100 earliest rock inscriptions from the time of Islam. 100 earliest rock inscriptions from Hijazi. Marvelous research. You can check it up. Click there, go there, and there are many things that you can quote, and many things you when you read carefully, read to see if Islam is there. You'd find out Islam isn't there. And one of the ways in Islam isn't there is that the year, they'll actually go on to suggest a year of the writing of a particular inscription. For example, they say, I'm writing this at 20 years after the of the year of believers. Prime time to suggest AH, year of Hijrah, they would not. Negative evidence. Hijrah is didn't happen. Guess what? I actually pointed out to here one of my research works, and I'm going to write a book on this, how Islam began. I'm going to point out to the fact that there was Hijrah according to the Quran. There was a mobilization, running away, or flee, but it isn't from Mecca to Medina. It is essentially a mafia army mobilization to go around and kill others. And they decided where they'd go. They weren't fleeing from anyone. References are replete in the Quran. I haven't expanded on that. It'll be in my in one of the forthcoming books that I have. That's Hijrah. Now, Medina, I'm going to skip, like I said, quickly. Sorry. No positive evidence for the fact of Jews being in Medina. Remember I said for the storyline there needs to be 3 Jewish tribes. There is no indication, evidence whatsoever that Jews existed in Medina at all. And Muhammad is supposed to, for the Ummah, he is supposed to have written a constitution, which is a fairly significant document. But there is no evidence, positive evidence at all. There's, like I said, there's plenty of negative evidence for Medina-based Ummah. In the sense of an Ummah who's waiting to take over Mecca. There's plenty of negative evidence even in the Quran. Rashidun Caliphate, the first caliphate, the first four caliphs together, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali. First 4 caliphs together, one after another, ruled over the entire Islamic Ummah with an iron fist. Of course, they were killed also. There was plenty of treachery and backstabbing and so on, according to the claims. But when they were ruling, they had power, phenomenal power over all people, religious and political. Yet, there exists no shred of evidence, would you believe, for even the existence of these characters, let alone other details. And of course, they were expanding Islamic Caliphate. They went beyond Hijazi, going into Syria, going into Egypt, and so on. No evidence exists, because when you go into foreign area to take over, foreigners would be writing about you taking over. There is no evidence that the caliphs existed, and there's plenty of negative evidence of one of which is from Quran's manuscripts, which is very simply the point that the claim is the third caliph standardized the Quran. But and since that time, the Quran, some of the Quranic manuscripts actually were only purely in Islamic hands, pure Islamic land area. But guess what? These manuscripts don't exist, which means clearly it's a made-up story. So the third caliph standardizing is a made-up story, because he's supposed to have produced manuscripts which you and I know, if you burn a Quran, what happens to you and me today, even in the Western world, let alone in the Islamic world. But in the Islamic world, when continually they had power for continually from that time till today, continually they had power to monitor. These manuscripts have vanished away. None of these exist today, and so that's a negative evidence. Now, I'll skip this. Essentially, for the claim that Quran was given by Muhammad, no positive evidence, plenty of negative evidence. Now, finally, I think, that's the final one. The identity. I said soon after Muhammad arrived back at Mecca, 632 AD, he was dead and began Rashidun Caliphate. Now the identities supposedly had been solidified. What are the identities? The religion is called Islam, people are called Muslim, and the leader is called the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad. Guess what? There's no positive evidence for any of these in the first many decades. No positive evidence for any of these. Contrarily, we have negative evidence. I pointed to this research earlier. I remember when I was speaking about Hijrah, Year of the Believers. This is the link, Year of the Believers link, the same research. 100 dated rock inscriptions. From it, when it says 100, it is actually talking about all 100 available. There's nothing else, and therefore it's only 100. It's not a selected, it's not a selection and ignoring others. But anyway, 100, and the timeline is clear. Until 690 AD, none of the aspects of the identity existed. 690 AD is 60 years after, around 60 years after Muhammad has passed away. For 6 decades, no one cared to call themselves Muslims. No one cared to refer to their leader as a prophet Muhammad. Now, Muhammad wasn't even referred to for around 60 years, for 58 years. And Islam as a religion, no one. Even in foreign sources which were recording some of the interactions that these guys were, some of the guys, no, caliphs aren't named, are having, you see that the foreigners are seeing them as Saracens. You might have heard the term. Football fans would know Saracens. Saracens is a name that comes from there, which literally means thieves, robbers. So they purely saw these people as robbers, nothing more. Not when I say nothing more, I mean they saw them as a little bit more than that. There was a religious dimension certainly to that, but the identity came about very late. Six decades later is when you begin seeing Muhammad being referred to as a prophet. And then you wait for a couple of more decades before you begin seeing religious observations like Islamic prayer, Islamic pilgrimage, and Islamic fast. Until then, no one refers to any of these things. And then you need to wait for one more decade before you begin seeing the identity Muslim and Islam. And AD 730 onwards, you begin seeing a primitive form of everything combined together and going forward. And interestingly, I've added coins also there. Please click and it will take you to an article. There are plenty of research articles available on the coins, early coins of Hijazi area, or early coins of not just Hijazi, but also of Syria, Damascus, which, by the way, the initial caliphate is Rashidun Caliphate. Rashidun Caliphate was based in Hijazi. The headquarters was in Hijazi. The next caliphate is Abbasid, Umayyad Caliphate, not Abbasid, Umayyad Caliphate. The headquarters was Damascus. By the way, in history, the very first evidenced caliphate are Umayyad Caliphs. That is the first historically attestable caliphs. So Rashidun, every evidence says no, they didn't exist. Umayyad caliphs existed. Curiously, the question is, they are the first one archaeologically attested. And then the question is, well, you're supposed to be caliphs. Why are you headquartered in Damascus? Mecca is supposed to be a holy city. Hijazi is supposed to be a holy area. Mecca is number 1, Medina is number 2. They'd say Jerusalem is number 3. At least your first 2 are here. Damascus is no way. Who wants to live there? A Muslim, faithful Muslim. Yet these guys, the first ever attested. In other words, that's the argument. But if you look at the coins, phenomenal interesting things. The first very early coins from the caliphs, or what are supposed to be supposedly Islamic heartland, the coins suggest that they weren't practicing Islam. Would you believe? Until Umayyad Caliphate, even with Umayyad Caliphate, it was a caliph called Abdul Malik. Only during his time, first half of a portion of his ruling, non-Muslim in terms of details. Today he is portrayed to be Muslim, but the details of coins he makes, no, he wasn't a Muslim. And then he suddenly becomes a Muslim. You can see that in the coins that he makes. Pre his time, go through the coins, you don't find the identity. You see the point that I'm making. I've only touched upon a few of the claims that I highlighted here. Remember the claims on the red here on the right hand side? All of these are massive claims, but none of these have positive evidence. All of these have negative evidence, quite heavy negative evidence. In other words, Islam is a hopeless myth. I'd like to close there and open the floor for questions, especially if there are new questions. Brother Blessing, can we please maybe open up the floor for new questions first, and then fill in the time with the old questions? What do you think?
Sure. Let's go ahead with that.
Yeah.
So thank you, Brother Arul. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask those questions, and we'll find answers to that before we go into any of those old questions.
Please go ahead, brother. Christian. I made a mistake with time again. For some reason, I thought we had
Okay.
40
Yeah.
minutes. Go on, Lenin.
There was there's one portion where you mentioned about idols not existing, but not having a at least a idol worship to the scale that they're stating. But there is idol worship at that time. There's still people worshiping, because you see like it also in the Bible, like there was a city that was worshiping idols and they kicked people out because they were saying it's bad for their business and stuff. So by how much what's the scale of idol worship at that time in terms of in that area?
Good question.
I understand there's no gathering in terms of all the idols in one location, but in terms of the worship itself, how would that be?
That's a very good question. So let me clarify. When I mention about idol worship not being there, I'm talking about the Arabian Peninsula. Remember, Muhammad's ministry was in Arabian Peninsula. I'm not commenting on idol worship elsewhere in the world. The Bible refers to, I think the reference you have is in Diana of Ephesus and all sorts of different places. Clearly there was idol worship, but I'm merely talking about the Arabian Peninsula. By that I mean Saudi Arabia. Today's Saudi Arabia, today's Qatar, Oman, UAE, Yemen. This sort of area, and there, because that's where Muhammad had come, Mecca, Medina. And he had a message, which is don't do idols. And Mecca is supposed to have been a center of idol worship And the people say 360 idols, documented 360 idols. Curiously, we have very evidence is strong. This is the remarkable point. Evidence is strong that 2 to 5 centuries, depending on the area, idol worship did not exist at all in that entire Hijazi.
So, so like the tribes in that peninsula, they had they had no requirements to follow a religion. They were just living as their tribes individually. And then the claim is that they had 360 idols within this one city, and Muhammad said, "Ignore those idols, follow this one idol." Is that
Yeah. So the precise number 360 and the details around that come from late literature.
Okay.
But we have solid evidence that clearly there was idol worship in that entire area. There was tremendous idol worship. We have solid evidence, but centuries before Muhammad arrived. Centuries before Muhammad arrived, we have positive evidence, tremendously good evidence. Leila Nemi points to that in a one research article, one research thesis, which is part of a big book also actually. One chapter in a big book also on Islam and that area and that sort of stuff. Positively huge, tremendous, many pieces of evidence exist for idolatry existing in Hijazi, but only centuries before Muhammad. For centuries, positive evidence that idolatry had vanished. Who did that is a question, research area, academically. But speculatively, people say it's Jews and Christians. As a matter of fact, Quran, if you read carefully, Muhammad doesn't interact with whoever wrote the Quran or contributed to the Quran, weren't interacting with idolaters. They were interacting with Jews and Christians alone.
Okay, yeah. All right, thank you.
Sure, welcome. Levin, I couldn't hear you properly earlier. Please try again.
So I just wanted to let everyone know that the mics have been enabled, so anyone can unmute and ask questions.
Now we can hear you properly.
I was just updating on that. That was everything. That's everything.
Okay, cool. Any other questions if people want to unmute? I made a mistake. I for some reason I thought we had 20 more minutes.
Brother Arul,
Yes, please.
I am not a young man. I am a bit old man, but
You are
I'm just asking.
Yeah.
I'm listening all the conversation and the chatting and everything. I have a doubt why this we all are concerned about the young generation at the moment about this matter. Why? What is the secret the people are attracting? Such a good religion we have, like a Christian. Jesus still love others and all kind of things. We are following that. Why? What is the reason that the young people still attracting, to this religion? Always I was thinking that.
Well, very good question. Why could young people get attracted to Islam? And there are many who are getting attracted.
Yeah.
I think the primary reason in interactions is because doubts are being sown by Muslims about Christian theology and presenting Islamic theology as solid. Islamic history, Islam as solid. And they're saying Christian history is wrong. Doubts are being sown. And that's the primary reason at the top level. And this works because, and I'll say a couple of things here, because unfortunately on the Christian side, most churches, most Christians don't know the history properly. We know the Bible properly, we know God experientially, but we haven't trained Christian youngsters and every other generation haven't trained properly in history, especially after Roman Catholicism, the Reformation and so on. And our theology is a bit more complex, especially with the triunity of God. It's not as simple to, you can't just say God is one and that's it. It's when a Muslim comes and asks, why do you think Jesus is God? Not many can actually cope with that today, unfortunately, because we haven't trained properly. So on the Christian side. On contrary, on the Islamic side, it's all very primitive. There's no detail, and they'll always have a sugar-coated myth to present, and so it's very pleasing in 5 minutes. Hey, look, on Islamic side, we have marvelous history, and everyone, spouts out in 2 minutes some random nonsense that they think is history. Then they make it appear to the listeners as if it's history, but it's really not history. And their theology is primitive. Hey, there's only one God, and you have to submit to him. This is their marketing slogan. There's only one God, you have to submit. And so people fall. In other words, summing it all up, our theology is complex, and our awareness of our theology and history is lacking. Their theology is primitive and simple, and they are bold to lie, to present a lie as history. And in some cases, other things also attract, like the camaraderie. They move around together, and they bully. Muslims bully. In schools, we hear of reports. Many they bully. Hey, you said Jesus is God. In other words, they evangelize. Of course, it's not good news, but they evangelize.
I think the fear. I think our generation, our numbers are less. Our children are having fear. I think one of the other reasons they have fear in their mind. Maybe they're thinking that if we are going to debate with them, they may abuse, this kind of things. They have numbers are more than us, isn't it? Everywhere,
The
even
numbers necessarily wasn't high earlier. Even now, I don't think it is high. But you are right; they bully, and they even if there are a few, they make much noise and they shout, and they have a strategy in place, which is quite sophisticated to take over by a violent strategy. And thing is, of course, in Christian families, our children have confidence only to the extent of what we do know. If we don't know, we'll say we don't know. A Muslim would never say this. Even about things that they don't know, they'll come up, oh no, we do know, and then lie and then go away. Christians won't do, because we don't. That's not what we train our children to do, which quite rightly.
and I think unity also another thing. One of the thing I noticed that whether right or wrong, they have the unity among
Comrade,
themselves. That's the
they
thing.
lie together in mob. They'll attack.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
they're alone, they'll be quiet. If an individual
yeah.
Muslim shows up, they'll be quiet in an interaction. 2 or 3
I don't know
quiet.
I don't know the young generation or those who are here, because in back home, back Kerala, there's a particular name called this group. It's called Kaka. Kaka, Kaka means crow. One crow is been hidden by somebody else. All other crow will come to attack you. The same way in this religion, if you or me, noticing or we are saying something against these people, the whole community will come and against you. They are unity into that way. But in our group, we don't have the unity. We are on comfort zone. We'll sit here and there and look, and who is going to beat, who is going to get beaten, and this kind of, they will enjoy. And the parents will say that, oh, why you gone for that? You can sit idle home. Understand that? So
But
they are
through God's
not.
grace, we are raising up as an army, and through this training and so on, especially as we begin ministering and so on. I think through God's grace, because Christians are the only ones who will have genuine love.
Exactly, and
Muslims
yeah,
would betray. They'll show
yeah.
unity, but when time is appropriate, they'll betray. Al-Baghdadi will kill Osama bin Laden if he gets a chance. That's how they behave. But true Christians won't. And so we have substance. We just need to practice and implement properly through God's grace.